Hi there, my name is James Craig and welcome to my first video for Mini Masterworks. I am here today to talk about some weathering techniques. Specifically, today we're going to weather some wood. This is my first ever video for anyone, and I'm glad to be doing it here with my friends at Mini Masterworks. I am a little different than most of the other guests that you'll be watching videos from. Many of them are accomplished and amazing professionals. Me, I'm just a guy in my basement. So I am a hobbyist. I am a high school teacher. I am not a professional painter. But that being said, I have had some wonderful opportunities and some great experiences with the miniature painting community through the years. So I always do my best to give back. Today, like I said, we're going to be talking about some wood weathering techniques. I was asked to do these several times by different people. A couple of years ago, I made this fun little post-apocalyptic diorama, and it was only because of the help of some really incredible people that I was able, in that piece, to finally realize a few styles and techniques that I'd really wanted to achieve over the years. And now I'm, going to help you guys hopefully do the same. All right, so the first thing I've done here is I chose a model to work on for a few of my things. It's over the last while I've been doing a lot of hobby painting, a lot of stuff for my games table with my son. So I thought, you know what, let's continue working on that kind of stuff and just bring some of these techniques to the tabletop level. The thing is, these are very universal techniques. They are things that will work well for you no matter what kind of part of the hobby you're into. If you enjoy painting, here are some cool painting techniques. So the first thing I've done is I've got this little platform that I built for a water tower that we're building for my table. And the platform itself, believe it or not, it's part of an old CD case, but it's a plastic circle that I've added actual balsa wood to. There was a painter several years ago, I think it was David Rodriguez, after winning a major award, was doing an interview in White Dwarf magazine and talking about how important it was in his work to see a variety of different surface treatments, different textures. That's what helps bring his pieces from toys to masterpieces. And that was something that always kind of rang true with me. And it's always something that I've tried to work towards. Now, sometimes the best way to create different surfaces in a model is in illusion with paint, making it look like it's leather versus the cloth next to it, trying to find ways to make the paint behave differently. And sometimes it just makes more sense to actually use a different material. Wood is a really versatile material for doing lots of things with. It can be a lot of fun to work with. So we're gonna take a crack at making this look really worn and weathered, suitable for a post-apocalyptic game like Last Days or 40K, anything where we've got beaten, weathered, and worn. The diorama that I did was inspired by my visits to fishing villages along the east coast of Canada. Particularly places like around Peggy's Cove. Some really, really cool architecture built on these wooden stilts right out into the front of the water space. And you could see just how the elements had worked away at that, and how little bits of moss and lichen were growing over the years. And so in trying to replicate some of that, I used a few techniques. But to be perfectly honest, I didn't really know how to make that wood look like proper wood. I had done wood before in plastics, and I knew I could paint it in certain ways, but I had seen these artists, Marc Rossier, Chuck Doan, a number of others who had done like beautiful work with what appeared to be real wood. So I kind of dived in on that. Lots of people make scenery using balsa wood, popsicle sticks, whatever. This is going to help you kind of just push that realism and hopefully push that weathering and do some really cool stuff. So to start, nothing really super fancy. I've got my wood. I've got a little well palette. It's an ugly little thing, but it works. And I'm also going to use this as a palette too. This is just a comic board, a comic bag with a backing board and a white backing board. I use these for when I want to do things like weathering powders or things that are really messy, because it's just disposable after you're done. So I'm going to keep one of these handy as well. We don't need it quite yet, but we'll get there. I have myself a couple of cups, a variety of brushes. Mostly today I'm going to be using just cheap synthetic brushes because a lot of the techniques that I'm doing are going to be pretty rough on your equipment. So we're going to start with a little bit of ink. Give her a good shaking. Now this is Amsterdam acrylic ink, FW acrylic inks. I've got a few different brands. Just plain cheap India ink is perfect for this. You can probably pull this technique off with something like Null Oil, whatever cheap black ink you can find. You're probably in pretty good shape. A little bit of water, and I am just going to thin this ink way down. In fact, what I usually do is I start with one palette well that's still fairly concentrated, and I'm going to move just a little bit of that over into a second well. And instead of adding by brush, I use an eyedropper to add lots of water. So that's going to be very dilute. All right, so now that we've got this really thin diffuse mixture, we're just going to add it, focusing mostly along the ends of boards where we've created these great little joints and little nail holes and that kind of thing. Because rot tends to seep in from the ends. Now, like I was saying with my diorama being inspired by fishing villages, I always try and keep lots of reference around, take lots of pictures everywhere I go to kind of see how different materials wear and react over time. And I have a whole file on my phone and my computer looking at this kind of effect in wood. So I encourage you that wherever you go, you might get a few funny looks now and again as you're photographing rusty boats and signs and fences and whatever else, but if you think it might be useful to you, keep an eye out, keep a file just for such things. Now, I'm not going to do literally every board and every join. I'm gonna try and create a little bit of randomness here, but the effect is largely like so. And we are trying to let that paint, that ink, seep in just a little bit and be carried by capillary action along the boards themselves, and let that get sucked up in there. All right, so I'm going to do a little bit more here, and then I'll come right back to you. All right, so having done the ends of several boards and given myself a bit of a variety of styles, I've actually taken a bit more water and diluted this mixture even further. So now it is mostly water. I'm actually just going to brush that along the grain of the boards and allow that to help the ink that we've already introduced travel just a little bit further and slowly gray out and weather much of the remaining board work. Now, the surfaces of these boards, when you're working with balsa wood, it does have its own grain, and sometimes it's better just to leave it alone to let it work in scale. But for a little bit more of a dramatic finish, I went through and I scored the surface of each of these boards with the back of an X-Acto knife to give it a little bit more of a pronounced grain effect. And I also used a small wire brush to brush along the direction of the grain to enhance it even further. So there's actually lots and lots of spaces for this ink to kind of flow and gather. And here we are with the watery ink and a brush pretty much the same width as the boards. And so we get the whole thing a tinting. Now, I'm going to go back, pick up some of this, and a little bit of my stronger ink, and I'm just going to go back into spots that I feel are going to be really rotten, or where I don't feel there's enough contrast to keep the surface interesting. And this stronger ink will now flow along with the water and really kind of seep up into the grains of the wood. Let's do a little bit of this here and there. Some right here too. Definitely some back here. And this is where I carved in some of the most rotten boards right here. So I'm going to put some more right in there. Now, if I feel that the effect is getting out of control or too blotchy, I can actually just grab some clean water as well, or our super dilute mixture, and just kind of go back over those areas, brush them out so that that effect travels further up the boards and gives us, there's my good rotten spot right there, and gives us a good bit of variety. So we have some interesting boards to work with. All of this is, of course, effectively underpainting. A little more strong black in here, I think, as we will be doing a coat of paint or stain over top to make them look really great. Now, this technique works well for fences, for pallets, for all kinds of weathered wood. So don't be afraid to experiment with this. It's a lot of fun, and it's kind of hard to go too far wrong, to be perfectly honest. All right, so there is our first stage of weathering done, and we've got some great rotten spots. We're just going to let that dry up for a few minutes. I'll use the hairdryer to help speed it along, and we'll see what's next. Welcome back. Just a couple of minutes later, little application of the hairdryer, and our wood effects have dried for the most part. Still a little damp, but not in any way that's problematic for what we're about to do. Now, the wood that is here still has a very warm hue to it, even though it's been given a bit of rot. And that works just great if you want to do something like this little palette that's made out of fairly new wood, but just kind of worn and beat. I think for our water tower, we want something that looks a little older. So what we're going to do is we're going to use some gray paint and gray inks of a couple of various hues to create more of this silvered wood kind of look. So, I mean, the fence in my yard has been there for 6 years, and this is more or less the color that the wood is now. So it doesn't take long for wood to silver, especially pressure-treated wood and wood that's been exposed continually to the outdoors. So what I'm going to do is I grabbed another little palette here for this, and we're just going to grab a couple of light grayish brown colors, and I've got, let's see, what have I got here? All right, back from grabbing some colors, I've grabbed a variety of beiges and gray tones. I've even got a couple of gray inks. So I've got lots to work with here. So we can make this certainly anything but uniform, get it very natural looking. So I'm just gonna throw a little bit of this in the palette. I can't tell you what color this is because I've used it so much I've wiped the label off, but it's from Minotaur. This one's Ancient Bone, also from Minotaur. I'll just toss a little bit of that in there. I'll use my tool to make sure that the opening in my paint is going to let me squeeze some out. This is hemp from Vallejo. And another nameless Minotaur paint. I should go back through, figure out what's what, and write them back on with Sharpie. And a little bit of gray colored inks. This is neutral gray from Amsterdam inks. Amsterdam make my favorite inks. And this is warm gray from Amsterdam. These inks are acrylic inks, so they're effectively a really thin, that one's got a little thingy on it, a little thin acrylic paint. They are fabulous. So with that and a fresh piece of paper towel on hand, I'm ready to do what is effectively the most basic of miniature painting techniques. I'm going to dry brush this. Let's choose a fairly short bristled brush. This one I was using earlier. Get it cleared out. Feels good. I really like this warm gray from FW, so I'm just going to brush a lot of that off of here. And when I'm doing my dry brushing here, I'm going to continue. I know you can get effects faster if you brush across the grain of the wood, but I still think that going with the grain of the wood will give you a better effect in the end. So I'm just going to spend a few minutes here lightly dry brushing some grayish tones into this wood to give it a more aged and silvered appearance, so that our result will be duller and less warm than the natural warmth that we see in the balsa wood. All right, so nothing super technical here. Just some light dry brushing, mostly to the centers of the boards. And I am going to not clean my brush specifically between colors, and I'm going to let the colors layer right on top of one another so that we end up with these soft, natural looking finishes. All right, I'd say about a sum total of maybe 2 minutes have passed since I turned off that camera, but I figured I'd have you come back to see that there really is no trick to what I'm doing here. It is really just kind of choosing values and creating as random and natural looking pattern as you can. Really make sure that if you feel that you've got too many boards that are all too dark together or too many boards that are all too light together, just grab another color and toss it in there so that you get more variety, and so that whatever shows after we're done the rest of our process, you end up with something that doesn't look uniform. And that's, again, why we don't dry brush across the boards. We just kind of do one board at a time. That means every board will end up looking a little different than the one next to it. I'm going to really put some light tones into a couple of these because I find it quite pleasing. Speaking of being pleased, I want to thank again Mini Masterworks for inviting me to do this with you all. There is a lot of joy in working with other people in this community. It's always brought me great learning, great opportunities, and great fun. But there's absolutely no way I could ever have won the awards that I've won, been able to be invited to do things like Judge Crystal Brush, without the help of other people along the way who are willing to share their time and energy to help me in my painting journey. So I'm going to send shout outs to all the people who've helped me along the way. and there's been a lot of them, and there's so many people out there that can help you these days. The Patreon accounts, the free accounts, the YouTube, all that kind of stuff. Man, we had that back in my day. Can hardly believe what kind of cool stuff is out there right now. But special thanks to some of my friends and mentors who have really been a great part of my hobby, and thankfully, as a result, a big part of my life. You know what? I've done this now, and I'm looking at it, and there's a spot that I really feel I want a little bit more wrought right in by this door here. So I'm actually going to reach back over for my inks that I had set aside. And I am going to just add a bit more along this door. I really want things to look kind of rotten along that frame, and also to give me an even better contrast when I go to paint that door. So I'm just going to put a lot of extra rot right around that. A little water. And we'll go back in with just a little more gray. There we go. Oh, I like the way that looks. Let me get a little bit of a different color on this one. And a little bit of this warmer brown on this one. Why not? Very Bob Ross here. All right, I'm just going to take a kind of last quick look through any boards where I feel there isn't enough definition between planks. Just going to go add a little bit more of that black ink into a couple of spots with a little water. Sink it right back in. Oh, that's looking fantastic now. I like that. All right. It is an art form. It is artistry. You just got to take your time and build till you feel that it's right. I'm going to throw a couple more little black tones in, probably one right here. And I'll come back and show you guys what's up in another minute or two then. So here we are a couple minutes later. I know we're like 25 minutes into the video now. This has taken very few of those minutes. But overall, I think the weathered look of it is looking great. I'm really quite pleased with this. Now, my plan was to make the next step of the video showing you how to do a peeled or cracked paint effect over this, but I'm actually so happy with this that I think I'm just going to add a little bit of weathering powders and rust effects, which I'll show you, to the boards. But to do the weathered and cracked paint effect over boards like this, like you see here, and back in there, I will grab some more wood and I will prep it in exactly the same way so that I can show you how to create that effect as well, because it's a pretty awesome effect. But I'm just so happy with my other piece that I think I'm going to carry on with it the way it is. So here we're going to go again. First shot, just the wood being done up as planks. All right, step 2 again, weathering with just the black ink. Here we are, dry brushed with a number of neutral tones. Starting to get there. So here we are, caught back up to the same stage that we were at with this, where we have inked in the dark rot. We have dry brushed the neutral colors into the surface. We have then asserted some of our darkest values to create a little bit of randomness and some additional depth. And so now we're ready to make sure that this is dry, and then we can move on to doing the worn paint effect over the top of it. So I'm going to use the hair dryer, and then I'm probably going to actually let this one sit and dry for a little while, even more so before I do the next technique, because I really want to make sure that this paint is biting securely into the wood before I get too much further. All right, here we are, ready to add a weathered painted effect to our wood. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get some of the paint that will be our surface color. In this particular case, I've actually chosen a dollar store craft paint, which again might seem like a strange thing, but this has a really super matte chalky surface, which again for weathered paint, for outdoor effects, really makes a nice contrast to some of the more satin paints that we see, especially when you're working with figures and clothes. So we'll set that back aside. And the other thing we're going to use is something that's a little unconventional, acetone. This came from my local pharmacy. It was not very expensive. Check for it in the nail polish aisle, but it is just a it's just a bottle of acetone that I'm spilling everywhere. Fantastic. Now, heads up, acetone will not treat your brushes nicely. Do not use your good brushes when you're doing this. I recommend using something like this. This is a dollar store paintbrush that's intended for watercolor. It's got probably pony hair, just a natural hair, natural fiber brush. This will be absolutely fine. So you need to have your two brushes ready to go, one for the paint and one for the acetone. And oops, I just let my paint one roll. Once you have your two brushes ready, one for the paint, one for the acetone, you're going to brush the acetone onto an individual board. I'll do this board this time. And we're just gonna slather that right on there. This is going to form a chemical resist. The paint won't like to adhere to it. The paint won't like it much at all, to be perfectly honest. Acetone and acrylic paints are not close friends in general. So I'm going to put kind of a rough stippled coat of my paint color on there. Set that brush back down. And already I can see from underneath a bit of bubbling from the acetone interacting with the paint. But we're going to push this even further. We're going to introduce even more acetone to the mix and let it really just eat away at that paint. That's what we're really after here. We're after its effects of breaking up and affecting the paint. Wipe that off. Now I'm going to use it pushing kind of along the board lengths. I'm going to use it to actually start to remove gently some of that paint. Should actually probably have a stiffer brush for this, but we'll get there. Let me grab a slightly stiffer brush for this, one that I don't mind letting stuff happen to. And we are now using a combination of chemical removal and mechanical removal because we're rubbing it. And we are going to get some really great natural looking weathered effects. I'm going to just take my paper towel here and lightly press it. Just give it a little wiping off. And you can see we have a very kind of naturally weathered paint effect. We can further reinforce this through more mechanical removal, but what I like to do is I like to go back in and then just stipple in a couple of places a little more paint. So I know there's a lot of people that use like the Ranger crackle paints and things like that. There are crackle mediums that you can use. I've used them. I've actually used them in combination with this technique, but with that, you really don't need a whole lot of other materials beyond the acetone and just a little bit of removal. So I'm going to go ahead and do these other boards here now. You need some more acetone. Should maybe put it in a little bowl instead of this old palette, but that's all right. Normally I use a little ceramic dish, but I must have taken it up to wash it out because it's not sitting beside me right now and I'm not going to go get it. All right, so acetone brush, plank, Add just a little bit of paint to this one. Back with the acetone. Watch it eat away. That looks pretty darn nice to me. Next plank. Stipple in some paint. There's no point in painting the whole board when you've got one that's really rotten and you want to show it off. Go back with the acetone. Let it eat that paint. Stippling with this brush as I add those extra layers and just watch it go. Very naturally, very effectively. Back to the paint. I'll leave this board a little redder than that one, I think. So I'm not actually going to remove too much of this one. I'll just dab on a little acetone, let it do its own work. And with our last most rotten board, I'm going to pretty much apply the acetone heavily across the board. I will only apply the paint towards the ends away from our rot. And then back to our final applications of acetone. Might need just a tiny bit more. Stuff evaporates pretty quick. Be careful you're not breathing in too much of it. It's not good for you in general. But this is relatively odor-free. This concentration is not super strong as it is intended for people to remove nail polish. And there we go. Should probably dab it off. Picked up a little bit of white flecks there from some old paint left in the palette. Again, something I should have anticipated. There is a really effective worn wood technique that's quite easy and looks just amazing. Next steps with this would be potentially going back in, and if you really wanted to refocus the very darks and the rotten ink parts, you could reinsist those. One of my favorite artists, a guy named Mig Jimenez, when he was talking about his work, he always said that he needs to insist it again. And I always found that really a useful way to think. I insist that there be more darkness there. But once this dries, it'll look really great. It'll be very matte. It will make great contrast against the figures and whatever diorama or scene you're making. And it will give you, again, further options to take this. You can add small nails and bolts or screws. Here I did that with just little pieces of wire that I inserted. And doing that gives you an opportunity to add some small rust streaks around some of them. But I'll be tackling rusting in another upcoming video for Mini Masterworks. And I think that's our main topic for today, weathering wood. I hope that this video was useful and enjoyable, and I look forward to seeing you guys in another upcoming video. Have a good one, and thank you very much from James Craig and Mini Masterworks.